Assalamualaikum and thank you everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My talk today is called Measurement Towards Creating Architecture in the City. It's the same with the writing here. So the basic fundamental understanding of architecture education insists that one must acquire the knowledge and memorize almost everything. Architecture's existence can be traced chronologically from the beginning of mankind by relating from their origins of built forms and doctrines. But the funny thing is, sometimes you remember things and sometimes you keep forgetting stuff. Like what I'm doing today, yeah, I have to have something. I think this is a defense. But architecture can be read and understood by bits and pieces, by fragments. You don't actually have to have a certain chronology to read architecture. You can find them, basically you can get it anywhere, and you can trace them and you can fit them together as bits and pieces by fate and even by chance. And today here I would like to basically, this will perhaps become the premise of the talk today. So I will start off linear and fragmented. My MH thesis entitled Fit Plastic work on this premise. The ideas and concepts are taught in fragments as open-ended source of production. An Austrian friend of mine refers to it as butterfly that roams anywhere it pleases and stays in the middle of an occasion just enough to breathe a new life. So I chose a handsaw as my butterfly. I started reinterpreting the functions of the handsaw to create a certain loop that perhaps would create more kind of like functions before. For example, the advantages of a cutting tool is that you can somehow organize the control of cuts. But what if you reorganize the control of cuts, and what are the outcome of it? So by looping different angles and pieces, you may get different cuts or perhaps different results. This kind of like unpredictable result is part of the reason for this construction of the tool or apparatus. In my early years of teaching, I had to do a studio program for the first year design studio. I usually wrote a short story, but it's a short story. It's basically a short story without a beginning or an end. It's like arriving in the middle of the reading, arriving in the middle of reading a book. So I gave it to the students for them to decipher. Usually, what I've written is that at the end of the short story, I wrote in something explaining that it's an excerpt taken from a book. It's basically fictional, but I made it up as if it looks like it came from a torn page. So, in a way that the students will keep on searching for the source of that written note. It's like watching the movie Three Colors Red by Krzysztof Kieslowski. It's an old movie. It's about voyeurism. The two main characters is the old man and Valentine. So the old man is a voyeur himself, and he always talks about fate with Valentine. Once he gave her an advice, basically, if she would carry a book and the book would fall off on the ground unintentionally, Valentine would pick up the book and start reading that page. And by reading that page, that is fate. And whatever it is on that page has to do with something that's going to be in the future. And Valentine did it in that movie. What happens is that she was in a drowning experience and got herself a boyfriend. But I don't think that's the point of the movie, or probably that's not the point of that old man. That old man perhaps knows something, would want to tell something about how you can read the book without even knowing the ending or the beginning, but whatever book it is. So basically, this idea entails a journey of reinterpretation of what possible things that you can do by basically starting off something in the middle. It's like peeping through a keyhole and trying to figure out what's outside to reconstruct again a new journey. Before usually the beginning of the studio, you have this so-called program vetting. This is what you do in architecture. You have this program vetting. You have all the teachers, all the lecturers around to basically discuss if what you're doing is right. So, as a kind of like what I'm doing here, like a defense system, is that you give them what they want. It's easy as that, because arguments takes time. This is how you negotiate things. But in real, truthfully, I don't have any idea where that project is going to be. Even there's no typology types, because when you want to do architecture, you need to have a certain types. Is this the building? Is this what you're going to do? This is the schedule of accommodation. You need a toilet. Things like that. It's actually blurred out when once you've given the what you call it, the fabricated program to the vetters and give a different one to the students. It always works like that, and usually I don't get caught. So it's like basically giving because you don't know what you don't know what you're going to do, which is to me interests me more rather than knowing what to do. So I try to talk to my students. I think some of my students are here and they know already what's the outcome. I told them not to do what you know, or probably it's better not to know what to do. Something like that. It's a kind of exploration, but actually makes them in a state of free falling. And also explain to them about the project, one by one, word by word, meaning by meaning, and each time I start to basically make a sort of convoluted message towards it, so it becomes much more confusing. You can see it in their face. I'll give this. But it is fun to see that you're giving them so many types of maze of things, you know, but actually it's quite exhausting. Why is it exhausting? Because it's not really a game, because what you're dealing here is architecture, something stable. You are building something stable. But what you are imagining you are building is something else. So, it's exhausting because there's three types of things that you need to basically understood. It's basically to learn and relearn about things in life. The first thing is basically the liberation process, because most of people who never understood about architecture, or probably who knows about architecture, knows perhaps something which is not really what we want, or probably not correct, or probably a kind of symbolism that they have. Architect does drawing, architect knows this, knows that, but actually that's not the truth. It's because it started to get complicated once you've been teaching upper years, when they think that they know what architecture is. This certain liberation process is a kind of thing that you question back the idea of form and what is the idea of architecture. You question them, trying to break whatever they have in their minds of what architecture is. This is quite hard, because it is a kind of belief that you know, but it's not belief in religion, so it's okay that you can bend things around. It's about trying to take it out and replace a new meaning. How do you do that? Firstly, it's about doing things that doesn't have any meaning at all. For example, mathematics in architecture. Of course, there is mathematics in architecture, and it's called geometry. You construct things without noticing without even having any meaning, but just understanding coordination, understanding cuttings, understanding things that you fold, things that you do, understanding action. It's all talking about verb, action, rather than thinking about that. So that's the first thing that you do. That's the first thing that I do. The second thing is, once you've taken away all the symbols and all the thing which is called style, genre, and all these things, to creating blank slate, you need to reintroduce new meanings towards that, what I call that, phases of nothingness. It's actually not nothingness, something like that. So in a way, you are giving this responsibility to the students. Now, this is the part where you become the kind of critics to what they do, because they come up with things that came up with new meanings. and you start to push them to basically defend their meanings, their convictions of things. This is like creating new languages. And usually, with that conviction, usually you have to base on something, because there's nothing to base on, because as I mentioned, free falling, what base do you follow? There's an artist back then, early 20th century, which is called the Russian avant-garde. They did all these practices to basically release themselves, a kind of liberation, but without any meaning at all. But in architecture, you need to apply this kind of meaning so that it will make sense. So basically, it's all about the reality of things. But to make things more interesting, and it interests me as well, is the worst kind of reality, the decay, the proponents of world deterioration. This is what interests me. And the most important thing is, can you play back before that? Gampang Bos, I don't know, because most of you guys are not Indonesian, but Gampang Bos means, in Malaysia, Gampang means something which is not good. Perhaps in Indonesia it means bisa bos, senang bos, it's easy. So basically these are what it is written if you write in Zapping. Yeah? It's about communication, which is the most important part, the skill of understanding things. This is a part where metaphors becomes important, drawing becomes important, as well as communication becomes important. If you cannot communicate like me today, holding a piece of paper, then what's the point of basically standing up? So basically, what I'm doing is actually not opposing the architecture academics by basically proposing all this, by not, of course, eliminating history when what history has done to architecture. It's basically going back to the earlier idea that you are trying to come in the middle of things. By saying in the middle of things, you don't come into a story by basically bringing your own reality into that story. You come into the reality and trying to figure out what's happening to the surrounding reality. That means coming in the middle, that means there's a possibility of a different beginning or different ending. So you begin a new spectrum to search both ways, which is much more interesting because the conviction is yours, the responsibility is yours. In practice, usually we have, because when you do these kind of things, and architecture is bounded by the lembaga, which is the authority, a high authority, which is in the parliament. They would basically confine it as only academic exercise. I'm practicing right now, I don't see it as academic exercise, I see it as how you do work. And basically they would say that, but you have to understand there's a thing called practicality, there's a thing called reality. Practicality obviously is important, undoubtedly is important. But once you think about practicality, you would say that once you understand about things, instead about usage, you know that practicality is naturally something obvious. Once you know how to use this thing, you know it's obviously like this. Something obvious, rather than intellectual. So when I teach my students, back then, not now, when I teach my students, I always tell them, I'm actually teaching the future architects. So I have to be I have to be an academic intellectual. But when I'm practicing, I'm basically teaching the public. So you have to be a public intellectual. By talking about the obvious and practicality, that's not how things work. So basically, you need to negotiate with the clients, understanding things much more deeper. So what we've done is basically we try to talk about rationality by extending it. This is when we try to do rumah pisau, which basically maximizing the effect of architecture with low cost. So in practice, we tend to take things, we strongly feel that we like to do things on our own. Everything in totality, because you want to control things that you produce. But you have to understand that as all architects understood that there are more things that you don't know than what you know. First of all, you are afraid, it's risky, you're dealing with money, but actually it becomes a part of the knowledge. So you begin to create characters at the beginning, but at the end, when you start to deal with this architecture, you start to lose things. Everything starts to be all apart and becomes ridiculous at a sense that space and time becomes a part of that architecture itself, not just the thing that will be constructed. Sometimes what we do is we do things, we take time to basically complete architecture at a minimal cost. I think there's a pros and cons beyond that. So, have you guys read Italo Calvino, The Invisible Cities? Yeah? And now, The Invisible City is about a conversation between Kublai Khan and Marco Polo. And each chapter begins with a visual description of what the city is. But as you read along the book, you understand that it's not the physical stature that created the city. It's basically what the forces that determines the creation of the city. And what I would call that it's under constant flux, under constant change by the inhabitants persevere through intuitional persistence of time. Time and growth is the denominator of a city. So tackling architecture is actually tackling the city. It's all about haphazardness. It's all about time. It's all about growth, rather than the point of opinion or probably earlier characterization. There is no straight answer. There is no equilibrium. I would like to bring forth a theory which is called self-organized criticality. I think there are many physicists here probably knows that and probably would somehow disagree with this theory. I'll read this theory because it's quite hard for me to memorize. The theory states that in a configuration of the atoms, there exists a tiny anomaly in which, by quantifying these atoms in relation to quantum mechanics or orbital connection, it will unify in any form. It will not unify in any form. Even you can quantify chaos, but this cannot be quantified. This tiny anomaly. It is the agent that defines consistency, stability, and you cannot measure it. Whatever type of measurement that you want, Fibonacci. I only have 3 seconds, I'm just going to make it quick. So basically, we understood that a city is an old entity, and the formation of the city is classical in terms of age, in which all cities around the world is compounded by similar meanings but different altogether. So when architecture begins to intervene as an act of control and modernizing a functioning city, so it becomes like a fascist, a catalyst of control. So basically, architecture tries to resist time. Architecture tries to become the fascist of a building. In other words, architecture is the destruction of a city. My final word is basically, to achieve architecture in a city, we have to treat architecture like the city, unpredictable, not knowing where to go and relying on time and growth. Thank you.